My pleasure to introduce Ute Frevert, who has come all the way from Berlin to join us for this conference. Ute's had a long and distinguished career, and I hope you take the time to just look at her short biography in the program. I won't repeat that. She's worn many hats. Her work is broad, deep, and has been translated into many languages, thankfully, so we've all been able to benefit from that work. She's been in the vanguard of German scholarship that has advocated for a focus on gender across so many areas. Her current hat, and I'm sure there's more than one hat that you're wearing at the moment, is a particularly interesting one, and that's as Director of the History of Emotions Research Centre at the Max Planck Institute. Emotions as an historical topic is a fairly new field and a challenge methodologically for historians. But Ute would tell us that it's a necessary one because the emotionalisation of private space has been going on for well over 100 years. As there are few subjects, as we've seen already, and I'm sure we're going to see over the next 2 days, that raise an emotional response in the way that honour killings does, we're all looking forward to hearing Ute's presentation.
Well, thank you so much, Karen, for this very kind introduction, and Carolyn for the very generous invitation, which I gladly and enthusiastically accepted because I've been here before in 1983, but on a completely private visit. And since that's hard to believe, but that's probably close to 3 decades ago, there was some challenge to come back and see what's changed. And there was another reason to immediately accept Carolyn's invitation. When I got it, I had just finished writing a book, actually the first book that did not have to be translated into English because I wrote it in English, and whose first chapter deals with exactly the issues that will keep us busy for the next 2 days. And it's the book that is called Emotions in History, Lost and Found, and the first chapter actually deals with lost emotions and honor figures prominently among these lost emotions. I do this work. I wrote this book as part of the program that I'm directing at Berlin, a program that, as Karen explained, deals with this fairly new field of history of emotions. And just in order to give you some overview of what we're doing there, I won't talk about it, but I would like to distribute some of the flyers that we produce and that give you some insight into our hypotheses, our interests, and the wealth of different projects that are being undertaken under the umbrella of history of emotion. So if you like, I just here and you can take one. Now, I would like to start my presentation with a true story, unfortunately a true story, a story that a Swiss friend of mine shared with me 3 weeks ago. Her name is Lynn. She is the CEO of a company in St. Gallen and Zurich that employs people with a, let's say, difficult social background. One employee, a woman in her early 40s, had asked my friend for help because she felt threatened by a violent husband and wanted to move out of the family apartment. Many people knew about the woman's situation, not just the company, but also the police and social welfare agencies. But nobody could help her when eventually her husband, in broad daylight, first ran her over with her car and then ferociously beat her to death. At first glance, this seems like a clear case of domestic violence, a case that happens all too often all over the world and which mostly, but not exclusively, targets women. But there was something about this story that Lynn told me that made me wonder and ask her about the woman's ethnic background. What was it that had irritated me and spurred me to ask? Well, my friend had mentioned that the marriage drama continued after the woman's death, since her son now threatened to kill her daughter, his sister, and because she had taken her mother's side. And there was something else. My friend had also written about the reactions of other employees. Several women had told her that they sympathized with the husband, firmly convinced that he had done the right thing. This sounded somewhat unfamiliar. In cases of normal domestic violence, especially those marked by such extraordinary brutality, people generally do not openly support the perpetrator. They might, if at all, quote mitigating circumstances and point to how the wife had incited her husband's wrath. But they would rarely justify the murder. Moreover, a son would not threaten to kill his sister because she mourned her slain mother. When Lynn, this friend of mine, eventually told me that the woman was half Turkish and half Albanian, and that her husband came from the Kosovo, a mostly Muslim country in the Balkans, it all fell into place. So this appeared to be another case of honor killing. Actually, honor killing, we talked about language yesterday, and the German word for honor killing is not honor killing, it's called honor murder. It's not killing, it's murder. And this obviously, if I'm not mistaken, but the Turkish native speakers will correct me on this, directly takes up the Turkish word. Now, another case of honor killing, one of several that occur in Europe's cities with a large Muslim population. Additional details completed the picture and confirmed my suspicions. The woman was modern. She loved to wear high heels, dressed like Western women, no headscarf or long coats, and spoke fluent German, probably even Swiss German. But it was, above all, the positive reaction of bystanders, the comments of other Muslim women, that made both Lynn and me think about honor. We both share an interest in the subject, Lynn actually being my first PhD student who wrote her dissertation on honor-related practices and rituals of Swiss student fraternities during the 19th century. I myself have worked on men of honor in modern Germany and their infatuation with dueling. Crimes of honor are therefore not altogether unknown to us. What I would like to do in this talk is to look at those crimes in a historical perspective. This entails highlighting similarities, but also differences, and situating them in specific contexts. My context is European high society between the 18th and the early 20th century. It includes men and women from the aristocracy and, to an ever-increasing degree, from the middle and upper middle classes. They all share certain feelings of honor that basically follow the same pattern, from Spain to Russia, from Great Britain, which in this country is obviously not part of Europe because it's always mentioned distinctively, to Italy. These feelings are civilly gendered. Honor for men means something different from what it means for women. Honor for women is all about sexual restraint and decency. In simple words, women are not allowed to have sex with anyone other than their husband. If they sleep around, they are considered fallen women who have lost their natural sense of shame. They are women without honor. For men, honor is not associated with a natural sense of shame, but with a natural sense of courage, and natural always quotation marks. A man has to do anything to avoid being called a coward. He has to display stamina, steadfastness, and a willingness to stand up for his beliefs, values, and deeds. It is not enough to be a virtuous man who does not lie or cheat and who treats his peers with respect. It is important to show these virtues, and even more, to dismiss any doubts about one's ability to act in a virtuous and manly way. Honor basically consists of a personal performance signalizing to one's peers, look here, I am one of you, and I depend upon your approval and respect. Should this respect be withdrawn, should I lose this respect, I would do everything to reclaim it. I would even sacrifice my own life for my honor. This all sounds quite abstract, and it becomes even more abstract when we delve into questions of internal versus external honor, as they have been discussed throughout the modern period. But honor is not an abstract idea. Honor is all about practices, about actions and non-actions. Furthermore, honor comes to the fore when it is threatened. This happens, for example, when a gentleman calls into question another gentleman's decency and honesty. Calling someone a liar or a fraudster is considered a serious attack against the other's honor. Physical attacks, for instance, a slap in the face, are even worse. The ultimate assault occurs when one seduces someone's wife, fiancée, or daughter. In such cases, it's not only the woman who loses her honor, but also the husband or fiancé or father, respectively, feels insulted himself. Something that he possesses and has to guard is snatched from him, and this again is considered a terrible blow to his honor. How can and should he react? The rules of the game are clear. He has to call out the offender. Instead of fighting back impulsively, directly after the assault, he has to challenge the offender. In this case, they will either find a way to solve the honor problem if, for example, the offender apologizes, or they will have to meet at dawn out in the woods and fight a duel. They will not do this in private, however. They need to let others know. They need seconds who will pass on the challenge and will carry out the negotiations. And they need people to be present at the dueling site. They need, tout court, their peers to know about the encounter and to spread the word. This alerts us to the fact that honor, apart from being gendered, is something deeply social. It is born, of course, by individuals, but these individuals act as members of a social group. The group sets and defines the rules. The group judges individual behavior and misdemeanours. The group enforces compliance and sanctions those who do not comply. There is a telling scene in a famous late 19th century German novel, Theodor Fontane's Effi Briest, actually based on a true story. It is the story of a husband who finds out about his wife's infidelity and confides in an old friend. The friend strongly advises him against taking action, since the incident happened a long time ago, and the couple is now enjoying a fairly happy marriage. The husband, though, feels compelled to call out the lover. His argument is that by telling his friend, he made the affair public and invited doubts concerning his own moral principles. if he shies away from standing up to these principles and from acting as a man of honor, he will lose his peers and ultimately his friends' respect. He therefore chooses to challenge the former lover to a duel, kills him, and divorces his wife. There are three issues here deserving our attention. First, again, gender. Dueling, as part of the honor code, is an exclusively male thing. Women are excluded. Strictly speaking, it's not the wife who dishonors her husband through an adulterous act. It's the male rival who is considered the attacker and responsible agent. Women are generally not in a position to offend a man's honor. If a woman attempts this, the offended addresses her male guardian, her father, her husband, and holds him responsible, not the woman. Furthermore, women cannot defend or reclaim and reinstate their own honor. They always need a male protector to stand up for them and call the offender to account. Second issue, revenge. We might want to perceive the duel as an act of revenge, husband killing the rival and punishing the wife. According to the honor code, however, it has little to do with revenge. It is all about keeping the husband's honor intact, an honor injured by another man interfering with the first man's possession, an honor that has to be defended or restored by showing that the man is man enough to stand up for his interests and possessions. We might still wonder if this is not just window dressing, nice impassioned words that conceal the actual feelings of being jealous and hurt, and the desire to lash out against one's opponent. But consider the circumstances of the duel. It is an open combat that has been agreed upon by both parties on equal terms. Each bears the same risk of getting hurt or killed. Each runs the same chance of surviving unharmed and injuring the other. It is fair play from beginning to end. No surprise attacks, no inequality of power. Even a lack of experience does not render a person helpless, as testified by numerous cases in which the professional officer, who should know something about using his pistol, got killed by the short-sighted or otherwise less able-bodied academic. Happened quite often. In addition, the duel is performed of selected witnesses who ensure the fairness and equality of the encounter and later bear testimony for a wider audience of peers. If the duel spirals out of control, they can intervene and stop it, and they do. They can also try their best to avoid a fight by setting the affair peacefully, but still complying with the honor code and peer expectations. Third, we might wonder to what extent we might call a duel a crime of honor. All things considered, what is criminal about it? It seems to be an act of consent. Nobody is forced to fight a duel. Nobody is compelled to accept a challenge. Both parties agree to the terms negotiated by their seconds. Nobody enjoys an advantage or suffers a disadvantage. It is quite different from homicide or premeditated murder. Even the motives are noble, ensuring honor remains intact. So, where is the crime? In European legal cultures, because there were many, there were two distinct ways to answer this question. Under the French Penal Code introduced by Napoleon in 1810, the duel as such did not figure as a crime. There was no provision kind of even mentioning the duel. The only cases to reach the authorities and incur punishment were those in which someone was wounded or killed. Under Prussian and later German law, things were quite different. Here, people argued strongly for honor ennobling the duel, even in cases of a fatal outcome. Although killing in a duel was officially considered a crime because it interfered with the state monopoly on violence, on legitimate violence, it was punished mildly. A duelist who had killed his opponent usually spent a few months or even weeks in a privileged prison, only if convicted, of course, which did not happen all too often anyway. Now, let us turn to crimes of honor in a different context, the context introduced by my opening story. Since the 1980s, Western societies have become aware of a novel type of homicide that was eventually called crime of honor, honor killing, or honor murder. This happened interestingly at a time when honor had largely disappeared from the emotional lexicons of the West. Quoting the American sociologist Peter Berger from 1970, honor occupies about the same place in contemporary usage as chastity. At best, honor and chastity are seen as ideological leftovers in the consciousness of obsolete classes, such as military officers and ethnic grandmothers. End of quote. Peter Berger was right. And just to give you one example, rape. The 1970s were a time when rape gained center stage in the feminist struggle against women's social and legal discrimination. In retrospect, feminism proved successful, not in reducing the number of rape cases, but in redefining rape as a violation of a person's autonomy, integrity, and her right of sexual self-determination. The new definition entered legal codes and was eventually, in the 1990s, in my country, extended to encompass rape within marriage. This proved to be a radical break from earlier perceptions and regulations. The 1871 German Penal Code defined rape as a violation of moral codes. In international law, as it was codified during the late 19th and early 20th centuries, rape was barely mentioned, but circumscribed as a violation of family honor. And that's interesting to note. So the Brussels Declaration of 1874 or the peace conferences at The Hague in 1899 and 1907 did just that, circumscribe rape as a violation of family honor. Considering rape as a violation of family honor is not too alien to the logic of honor killings as they started to appear in Western societies from the late 20th century. In both cases, it was claimed that family honor was injured by a woman's sexual misdemeanor, be it active or passive, voluntary or forced, consensual or involuntary. Such acts were supposed to shame the entire family. And that's actually interesting because Andrew's quote from Titus Andronikos said, or only mentioned her honor. She should not survive her shame. There's no mention of family shame or the family being shamed by what was done to Lavinia. But again, in the cases that I'm referring to, things were different. They were supposed to shame the entire family. It was not just the woman's honor that was at stake, but the family's. This reasoning is based on the perception of a person, especially but not only a female person, as a part of a larger group that offers her status, protection, and meaning for her existence. First and foremost, the person is not an individual responsible for herself and her deeds, but instead a member of something larger, a family, a group, a social class, a clan. If the person is attacked, the entire group feels attacked and assumes responsibility. If the person violates the written and unwritten group rules, the group takes action and punishes the transgression. The close-knit relation between person and group is a cornerstone of honor cultures as they prevailed in Europe until the early 20th century and still prevail today in other parts of the world. As the German sociologist Georg Simmel observed around 1900, honor is the currency, the connective tissue, the glue of small circles that stand between the individual and larger society. Although such intermediate circles have multiplied and diversified throughout the 20th century, they have lost their exclusive grip on individuals. Each and every member of modern society as it developed in the last century, each and every member is of course also a member of many groups and institutions, family, church, workplace, gym club, you name it. Each and every group and institution follows its own rules and enforces its own code of behavior. You don't behave in a gym club as you behave at your workplace. Individuals thus juggle between different styles and regimes, and they choose between them. At the same time, though, they keep a distance, since they have to move between the different styles on a daily basis and cannot afford to become totally immersed in one at the expense of other ones. This is kind of a very short way how modernity, how modern social life can be circumscribed. And this is why Peter Berger in the 1970s called the notions of honor and chastity, closely intertwined where family honor is concerned, remnants of the past. A past that was relevant only to military officers and ethnic grandmothers who still followed exclusively a single hegemonic code. In one way, thus, the concept of family honor as it is evoked by those who commit or who justify honor killings today resembles what Europeans and North Americans and probably Australians had in mind and acted upon a century ago. It entails both a commitment to a group or institution and a gendered vision of decent behavior, meaning, above all, guarding and controlling women's sexual purity and moral compliance. There are three major differences, though. First, violating family honor in the old European fashion through rape, through seduction or adultery did not call for honor killing. Even if it resulted in a duel, the purpose of the duel was not murder. Its meaning, as I described, was that every man should stand up for his honor, thus keeping it intact or restoring it. The vast majority of duels ended without a drop of blood being spilled. Second, even if one of the duelists were killed, it was in some way consensual. Both knew what was at stake and agreed on the rules. It was an open fight with risks and chances evenly distributed. A stark difference from how honor killings in the more recent version are conducted. Third, affairs of honor in the old sense were conducted among men only. Women did not take part, they were mere bystanders, even if their behavior had at least partly caused the insult. This is completely different today. As in my opening true story, women are in most cases the target of family violence. We should, of course, not underestimate the degree to which men, too, become victims of honor killings. A recent survey in Germany between 1996 and 2005 identified 7-8 cases of honor killings with 109 victims, 47 of whom were men, and that makes up 43%. Among the perpetrators, almost all of them were male. The fact that women are the main targets also means that they have no chance to escape or to fight back. The honor game, as it is played here, is thus completely different from what we knew from Europe. Women are considered the major culprits, as their misdemeanor harms the honor of the entire group or family. If they break the strict rules of decent behavior by, for example, dressing differently or having a boyfriend or intending to leave a violent husband, they have to be punished, in extreme cases by being killed by a male member of the family who feels insulted and threatened by their behavior. European law generally calls this murder, premeditated and planned murder with mean motives, although there is some debate on the meanness of the act. And this somehow reminds me of the way in which 19th-century lawmakers tried, in Prussia and Germany, tried to defend the duel from the allegation that it was mere manslaughter. To conclude, let me say a final word about numbers and contexts. Both types of honor killings, the duel and today's killing of women, were and are relatively marginal cases. Crime statistics in Germany around 1900 counted around 100 dueling cases each year. Nowadays, around 10 honor killings in the strict sense of a woman being killed by a male family member are reported every year in my country. Even if there is a higher number of unknown and unreported cases, honor killings would not qualify as a daily phenomenon. Within the Muslim minority in Germany, for instance, the number of cases is very low indeed. And there is evidence that those who kill usually are first-generation immigrants who obviously find it hard to adjust and accept that women, their daughters, their wives, their sisters, hold different ideas from their own. Some sociologists and anthropologists argue that the culture clash experienced by those immigrants leads to a heightened sense of insecurity and rigidity when it comes to values, habits, customs. This would mean that honor killings would be more frequent in a diaspora culture than at home. But even home is changing, as it might be maybe witnessed in Turkey, and I'm sure we'll hear more about that, or in Pakistan, what Nilüfer told us about last night, where more and more women step out of their confines to challenge and renegotiate traditional notions of honor and chastity. A last word on Western societies. The way we deal with honor killings or murders deserves its own critical review. Despite the small numbers, public imagination is running wild. Whenever a new case comes up, national and local papers discuss it constantly and incessantly. It is portrayed not as what it is, a rare case of traditional morality, but as the epitome of Muslim culture. And Muslim culture is, of course, the opposite of what we cherish and value. What is largely forgotten is the fact that our culture included similar but also partly different habits, perceptions, and ideas, and that 100 years ago, family honor was a well-known item in Western lexicon. Thank you very much. Time for questions?
Yes.
Oh, sorry, Karen.
I'm sure we've got lots of questions, so we'll get started. No? Please, Rob.
Thanks very much. Wonderful talk. Just on the final point where you drew attention to the moral panic that arises out of violent killings. And clearly there is an element of moral panic there, but it seems to me that part of the concern over moral killings is the sense that this is a system. Most killings, most murders we regard as special cases. They arise out of unfortunate mistakes, things that go wrong in social relations. And the concern arises especially where it seems that 10 cases of honor killing are actually overshadowing hundreds and thousands and tens of thousands of family relations, so that women feel constrained in the exercise of their autonomy by the risk of moral killing. So it's not to say that there is no element of moral panic in the West, but it is in the context that this is seen as a systematic kind of killing rather than as a social accident.
Yes and no, I may say so. I completely agree that what is kind of troublesome, or what distinguishes these honor killings from kind of normal domestic violence that we are so well accustomed to and well aware of in our own countries is exactly the cultural code that is underlying it, that is buttressing it. And that's what I was referring to when I said, well, when I first heard about the incident that my friend told me about, I thought, well, kind of domestic violence, a husband running wild. And then what actually got me thinking about it and made me suspicious of, maybe something else is involved, is exactly the reaction. And that the reaction, especially the reaction of women, from this culture. And that's exactly what kind of is bewildering and allows and actually demands, not just allows, but demands to take this seriously. And I would strongly, I kind of make a confession here, I would strongly argue against what we were discussing yesterday, kind of taking the honor away from the word, or from the notion of killing here, because it's a special kind that does not make sense when you take honor away. Honor gives sense to what is being committed here. So that's the yes, but the no is where, and that's also something that came up in Nullifer's talk last night. And of course I don't know anything about Pakistan, but what I do know about my own country is that I would not go so far as to say that the system, that what you call system, or the cultural code underlying honor murders here, is a threat to any woman who lives, or who is a part of Muslim culture in Germany. I would not. It's not. And that's the distortion that we make by kind of taking this marginal phenomenon as a signal for something much larger. And I would doubt that, especially judging now, kind of knowing this very recent study that actually came out of another Max Planck Institute in Freiburg on international law, and where they showed that it's not just marginal in terms of numbers, but it's also marginal in terms of who are the perpetrators, these kind of first generation immigrants. And the second, third generation that is now much more prominent and also quantitatively prominent in Europe, obviously does not no longer share in these habits and in these customs. So I would be much more reluctant to argue that it's by its sheer existence it poses a threat to all the women. We have to distinguish between generations. We have to distinguish between educated and less educated women. We have to distinguish between these young women who now, even if they wear headscarves, they choose to wear headscarves, they are populating universities and high schools. And I cannot imagine that they, growing up as they do, would feel threatened by the custom.
Thank you. Now we've got some questions lining up. So we'll go with Margaret and then Nilufer and then Rupert.
Ute, thank you very much. I'm Margaret Jolly from the College of Asia and Pacific. Thank you for stressing the kind of diversity of context and for stressing the importance of histories within Europe or the West. But I just wanted to ponder, I suppose, what we do when we associate things which are archaic, emotions lost, with things which are going on in the present. And in particular, that kind of articulation of, if you like, a kind of exoticism in our imagination of things that are distant, and things that are in our own past and which are, in a sense, haunting our present. So in terms of what you plotted in terms of the duel, I mean, clearly, this is something that was very specific to a certain class. Clearly, you could argue that there was a kind of equal contest going on between the male duelers. But in the shadow of that duel in the forest, there was also, clearly a very kind of oppressive domination of women based upon their sexuality and at times I think their maternity. And so it seems to me that there is a profound similarity between gender violence of these kinds in terms of a pervasive double standard about women's sexuality, women's chastity, and sometimes women's bad mothering or abandonment of children being seen to be the problem, the source of the dishonour. And I'd suggest to you that women's bodies are kind of implicated with collectivities, not just seemingly archaic collectivities of clans and families, but also collectivities like nation states. So, for example, in the formation of the partition of India, the formation of that border was really predicated on, perceptions that women were in the wrong place, consorting with the enemy defined by faith. So I really have problems, I suppose, about the teleology of modernity. That, at the same time, I think as we can witness this disembedding of what were much more collectivist ideas of marriage and of families and so forth, I think that, in terms of what we're seeing at the moment, and particularly in these diasporic contexts in Europe, we're witnessing relational contests between ways of imagining as persons. And they are relational contests that are absolutely kind of configured by geopolitical imaginings about sort of Islam in the West. So I'm sorry to be so strenuous, but I really worry about, and partly along the lines, I think, of Carolyn's opening comments about this association between our past and over their present.
Can I respond right away? Again, I completely share your concerns here, and I did not mean. First of all, I did not mean to. I'm sorry to obviously have been very unclear about that. I did not mean to exoticize my duelists, because what I wanted to say is, look, what we're encountering here has now as being so allegedly exotic, has some very, very strong roots in our own society, and not as this kind of marginally deviant phenomenon as which we consider it now, but being part of high society, being fueling the imagination of novelists, of playwrights, of even if it was only kind of a marginal thing, it really European literature. Novels in the 19th century are full of these incidents. So it's all kinds of imaginations, and not negative ones. So look at that. And I also did not mean to disclose that underlying this code, this honor code among men, is of course a deeply patriarchal idea, and not just an idea, but practices of domination and of female subjugation. And it was not for nothing that the duel became criticized not only but also by feminists around 1900 that called it a patriarchal sin. It was part of patriarchy's, and it was perceived as such, patriarchy's hold on women. And still, while not wanting to kind of gloss over the power differential here, I still would draw a strict line between women's subjugation and repression and discrimination, which we have everywhere, and killing. There is it seems to be a fine line, but it's actually a very, very strong line of transgression. If you take the liberty, and obviously living in a culture that by just looking the other way or even openly supporting the habit, puts women on, makes them easy praise of a violence that actually completely extinguishes their existence, and other forms of violence against women. And I would very much like to kind of keep that line intact and not kind of blur it by saying, well, women are being repressed everywhere, so that's just another case of women's repression. I think it's not just another case, it's a completely different case.
Thank you, Ute, for your historical perspective. It was very interesting. I also want to know if you have any information on what was happening among the poor peasants in Europe. How did they deal with issues of honor? Or was this not a developed concept among them?
Mm-hmm.
If you have any information,
Mm-hmm.
perhaps you can share it with us. And the other thing is what you did mention in your conclusion, that a lot of these honor killings have to do with cultural changes that these communities face and have difficulty in adjusting. And this is across religions, like it's with Sikh families as well from Punjab that come from India, as well as Nepalese families, and of course from Bangladesh and from Arab countries and Pakistan. So it's not strictly about religion. So why is it that religion has been brought into it to such a great extent, and it's been looked upon as a Muslim practice rather than a practice of cultural, nature? So I'd be interested to know why the media is quite often talking about it from this perspective.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for these two questions. First, the poor peasants. The poor peasants didn't take issue because they had nothing to pass on, to inherit. And of course, when we talk about women's sexual purity that has to be guarded and controlled, it's all about passing on inheritance. And that's why it's, in at least in Europe, you can see that it's an infatuation of those, of the wealthy, that want to make sure that nothing kind of distorts this wealth, and that the women who are being given as brides are sexually pure, so that they can keep the family tree, the family lineage intact, and are not kind of disturbing it in any way. And poor peasants who did not have any possessions to pass on, they were not, I mean, there were no such honor practice. You can see them as soon as you have rich peasants, with huge land-owning classes. They accept the same honor standard, so to speak. But the poor peasants, the workers, for example, were much, much more lenient on women's sexuality, where it was kind of self-evident that you had to have premarital sexual intercourse, even in order to know that the woman was kind of fertile. So that was something, that bothered these bourgeois and aristocratic circles a lot. Why are they so kind of lenient? Why are they so lax with their standards? But it's all about property being passed on, I think. The very interesting question why cultural changes or or differences of culture are now kind of being reinterpreted as differences in religion. That has, and again, I've been watching that very closely in Germany, where I've been, still as a student activist, being involved in working with immigrants, mostly from Turkey. And they were always called the Turks and Turks with different cultures, customs, etc., different eating habits, and until 9/11. And from 9/11, that really changed. All of a sudden, they were called Muslims. And there was our Minister of the Interior established the Muslim Conference, where he brought in all the people from the various Turkish associations, mostly Turkish associations, and even the distinction between people from Lebanon or people from other Arabic countries and Turkey completely kind of glossed over, because they were all Muslims, and this kind of politicization of religion that kind of came through in 9/11 was immediately used to reconfigure the immigrant communities that had been talked about as these Turks that don't want to integrate. Now it's the Muslims, and it's their religion, which first of all does not allow them to mingle with us, and second poses this deeply political threat to our societies. And that's 9/11. Seems to be very clear. Okay. Thank you, Karen.